But, after the assessment, the initial assessment had occurred, as they were beginning to construct their transition plan, they brought in lots of different advocates and disability organizations to help them kind of design that transition plan out of like, tell us what you feel are the most important things for you, where you
Yeah.
would like to see changes. So as we're going to spend this money, we have to do this stuff over a course of time, but at least tell us what you want to see, what our priorities should be.
Well, hello and welcome to the ADA Shop Talk podcast. I'm your host, Paul Klein. And if you are an ADA coordinator, government official, architect, or accessibility specialist trying to better understand the ADA, then you are in the right place. The ADA Shop Talk podcast is brought to you by BlueDag. Check out BlueDag's Transition Plan Builder and Inspection Suite over at bluedag.com. And today I've got a great guest for you. In the past, I've had lots of, what we'd call built environment specialists, people like me that are like code officials and architects and deal with like asphalt and all that stuff. And that's a big part of accessibility, but equally so, and not as, I don't know, at least in the world of architecture and inspections and regulatory piece, is the advocacy piece. And I think I'm having people on, and I want to have more people like my guest today come on and talk about that piece because it's so important. And Chris Sparrow is a program manager for Barbara Stone Foundation in Greenville, South Carolina. I was down there and introduced to him by our friend Keith from City of Greer, South Carolina, and Chris has been involved in some great advocacy efforts, and like the Greenville GVL, and just helping people with disabilities. And he graduated high school and USC, and that is not University of Southern California for you California folks. That's University of South Carolina, I would imagine, with a Bachelor of Arts in Communication. He's active in the local disability community and began working in the disability advocacy field, I think in 2014, roughly. And he just enjoys improving accessibility, adaptive sports, and building a more engaged disability community in the Greenville, South Carolina area. And Chris, I'm so excited to have you. Welcome to the ADA Shop Talk podcast.
Thank you for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's so great to have you on here. I love to have new perspectives, and we talk a lot of code and standards and built environment stuff. And so I was really looking forward to our conversation. But tell our folks that don't know you and about your journey and backstory in working in the disability advocacy field and the ADA, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm originally from here in Greenville, South Carolina. And in 2012, July of 2012, I experienced a rare neurological event, I guess is what you could call it, for lack of a better term. It's something called transverse myelitis is the diagnosis, and it basically means your spinal cord inflames to the point where you're left with kind of three prognosis of either you regain all capabilities and you're fully functional again, you regain partial capabilities, and so you may walk with a walker, or may have some kind of gait, or you end up like me where you're completely paralyzed beneath the waist. And so I was 30 years old when that happened. I had actually, it was kind of a weird situation. I had gone back to college prior to that, and I had just finished. I had literally gotten married the week I was diagnosed with MS, and which was around June. And then, yeah, a little over a month later, for some odd reason, my spinal cord became inflamed and I became paralyzed. It was something kind of out of nowhere. It happened over the course of a week of there was nothing going on to where I was completely paralyzed. So it was definitely a shock to the system. and trying to, at that point too, I felt like, okay, well, I'm about to, I just gotten married, I just graduated, I'm about to go and get a new job, and it felt like life is about to start. And then it was kind of felt like, oh, well, I just got brought back down to, starting all the way over again, even further past it, and
Yeah.
having to learn how to get dressed and go to the bathroom and bathe myself in different ways, and just getting in the car a different way. So I spent about 5 weeks in the rehab hospital, trying to learn how to live life as someone who is paralyzed. And we didn't know exactly how long I was going to be paralyzed for, if this was going to be, a couple of months, or this was going to be a lifetime. No one could really tell us at that point. And so I spent basically the next 2 years trying to become unparalyzed and try to figure out what was going on with me. I went to Mayo Clinic and tried to get into a bunch of different studies. And finally, after 2 years, they kind of told us, if you hit that 2 year mark and nothing's come back, then nothing's probably going to come back.
Mm.
And so for me, that was, okay, it was a point where I was also ready to move forward. Like I was, when everything happened, I was like, okay, I'm about to start my life. And then it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm getting pulled back down. And so it was like another 2 years. And so by the time that was done, I was ready to go. I'm like, let me do something. I'm ready to move forward,
Yeah, I
get a
just
job, and just figure out the rest of my life from here. And so that's what I did. I started to, well, part of it I will say is early on, I realized that I wanted to take what was happening to me and do something with it, lean into my paralysis and try to learn from it and grow from it and find ways that I could help other people, and not just have, okay, well, I was paralyzed and now I'm trying to live in my life, but I'm actually doing something with it, and just trying to engage others. And so through that, I ended up getting a job with a local center for independent living. And that was kind of, I guess, say my training ground and just all things disabilities.
mhm.
And that's where I'd always known that I wanted to get into the accessibility aspect of, um, you know, trying to make the world, the built-in environment around us more accessible. Uh, but I didn't kind of know where to start. But that kind of helped me, uh, get into getting my certification, my ADA coordinator certification, and just learning a lot more, doing more assessments, doing trainings for different professionals or other nonprofits, and then just trying to start to engage. Like our local area, and
Mhm.
start to speak to all the different ADA coordinators and develop relationships with them. And then from there, I kind of want to focus more just locally uh, on our Greenville area, because the Center for Independent Living I was with was kind of more of a statewide type thing. And so I wanted to just focus on our town, because I was like, there's
Yeah.
still issues going on here that aren't getting taken care of. And so that's how I got involved with the Barbara Stone Foundation. That is a Greenville focused nonprofit. And it's Barbara Stone is actually the namesake. She was a parent of a person with a disability back in the 70s here in, the deep South. You can imagine what that was like for people with disabilities at that point. There was no services around. And
Right.
so she made it her mission to create disability services in our area, and then expand those services. Um, and then finally, kind of as that grew, uh, and it became like more state-run services at that point and county-run services, we became more of a, well, let's look at how we can invest in and fund, uh, different initiatives and things that are innovative and creative, like programs that are going to, help bring more, I guess, programming and other, I guess, opportunities for
Mhm.
people with disabilities. Because for a long time, there was no opportunities for people with disabilities where we're at. And, some people may say there's still a large lack of opportunities for people with disabilities here. but that's kind of why we're still functioning, and what we're doing is we're trying to change that and get involved as much as we can at um, bringing more, not just programs, but just um, you know, things for people to do. I
Yeah.
think sometimes we get caught in like, okay, well, we need employment programming, or we need, it's a lot of times it becomes transitional. We forget that, like, it's a whole person. So that's what we kind of try to look at too. We do a lot of recreational programming around here. We've done really well with that in Greenville in the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw some of the facilities the city of Greenville had, and they had a lot of, um, recreational facilities that are, friendly to the disabled community. And so it was refreshing to see because, having come from California, it's always been a little more, I guess, progressive in that space. They had, the AD, I mean, they had accessibility requirements long before the ADA. And so seeing that in a deep South state, like South Carolina, in a city down there, takes it really serious was refreshing. And then I think that's one of the big things, Chris, is, and for you listening is, you don't have to start big or go attack the feds, or your state or a regional, start making a difference right in your little local community, whether it's small or big, like Chris did, and you can have a huge impact. And some of the things that Chris has been involved with down there are very forefront and cutting edge and so forth, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But the other thing for you, you ADA coordinators, and Chris, if you could touch on this a little bit, is I think ADA coordinators, local city governments that are trying to meet their Title II obligations are always, challenged with, okay, how do we make this work? We're trying to figure out where should we spend our money? Should we go out and rebuild all the parking lots for all the city facilities? But I think one of the underutilized avenues for a lot of Title II entities is the local advocacy groups. They don't involve them sometimes in the process. And I mean, they're your biggest friend. I mean, if you get the DOJ knocking on your door and a city says, hey, I've involved the local independent housing center or these different entities that are advocacy entities in our Title II transition process. Have you seen that that relationship really in a positive light and make a big difference in your experience?
Yeah, so I think a good thing that's happening here in Greenville is we're getting a lot of people from different areas of the country who are moving here, who have already kind of are inclined to accessibility. And so we're finding a lot of new kind of local ADA coordinators coming in who are, part of either different city governments. And through that, um, they've been, I want to say smart enough, but wise enough to want to reach out to um, different, organizations that work with people here with disabilities in the Greenville area, not just us either. But one thing that I thought was smart was a few years ago, as the city was doing a, kind of an assessment of all their parks, and, at that point, we were still kind of behind on, meeting our ADA obligations here. But, after the assessment, the initial assessment had occurred, as they were beginning to construct their transition plan, they brought in lots of different advocates and disability organizations, to help them kind of design that transition plan out of, like, tell us what you feel are the most important things for you, where you
Yeah.
would like to see changes. So as we're going to spend this money, we know we have to do this stuff over a course of time, but at least tell us what you want to see, what our priorities should be.
Yeah.
And I thought that was, again, just really wise on their part to know, like, well, then we're not going to just do this on our own. Let's actually talk to people. And I think those were the parts where, um, they started becoming just more committed to the disability community. And then as we were engaged with them in ways that weren't like, oh, you're doing this wrong and this is messed up and I'm going to sue you here. And although, those do have their times and places where they need to be strategies that are engaged, for us, it was. we didn't necessarily need to engage those specific strategies because we felt like the city and the county and the other municipalities around us were just very engaging with us and wanted to hear from us. And even now, still, if anything pops up that makes either our codes enforcement guys or our engineers scratch their heads or have any kind of questions, or if they start to get pushback from developers, we've seen that a lot too. They will reach out to us and say, no, we want you on site, come here, we want you to help kind of guide us through this and let us know what you think. I mean, they know the codes, they know what's supposed to be there, but they still are reaching out to, you know, get our take on it. And I think it also helps to see it in real world action, right?
Yeah.
So for like, oh, we built this thing and it may not be right. We kind of question it, but then when you see somebody in a wheelchair struggling to get up this steep slope, or whatever the case may be, it really puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
And so our city is also really good about making sure that the developers, the builders are all part of those meetings and all part of those, when we're doing it, so they have an understanding of it too. So everybody gets the big idea of like, this is why it's important.
Yeah. They're all getting buy-in, and then it's a collaborative effort, with the local advocacy group or the local Chris, leading the way, finding that person in your community and bringing them in part of the process. Because I've, like you've probably experienced before, Chris, cities and counties and local governments want to do the right thing, but it's just like, where do we spend the money? And that's why, like, man, your local advocacy groups are just prime for that, because doesn't do any good to go spend millions of dollars on making some building accessible, but the services that particular community needs, and nobody knows that better than the local community. Like, you can follow the federal standards and the guidelines and all that, but your local groups that are using your local facilities and infrastructure on a daily basis are going to know where those soft spots are, or gaps, and can help guide that. And then to the flip side to what your point, Chris, is if you have the buy-in of the locals, they're less likely to complain, and get frustrated. And then they go, like, I worked for a local municipality in California, and they wouldn't, I said, we need to be looking at this. They ignored me for years. And then finally, local advocacy said, hey, you need to have disabled parking down here on your new main street, refresh they did. And they didn't put any accessible parking in. They didn't follow no, it's not in the standard. We don't have to do it. Well, finally the local advocacy group got tired of complaining also, and they went to the DOT and the DOJ, and all of a sudden it became a priority. And now there's accessible parking, which what Paul was saying like 5 years earlier we needed. But anyway,
Yeah, I mean,
it's just frustrating.
Yeah, people will utilize legal strategies when they don't feel heard. If you listen to your citizens and you talk to people and you do that in a genuine way and you follow up and you do what you're going to say, then people will feel heard, and yeah, you're not going to get as many complaints.
Yeah, and I think that's the fear a lot of local officials have, is that, like, well, if I involve them and they see the inside workings of what we're doing, we're exposing ourselves to liability, or they're going to sue us anyway. I've heard that before, and I'm like, no, bring them on as a partner and part of the process. And I think that's what you've been so successful at in that area. And if more communities could do that, it's just better. It's like, you can stick your head in the sand like an ostrich, but it doesn't make it go away. The tiger's still running right around, and your obligation is still there. It's just better to head on with the local community and involve them in the process and be transparent, and less likely to get those complaints and lawsuits and everything. And it's just so much easier. And I know I talked to a DOJ investigator, and he said, there's the day before we come to your community and the day after. It's like AD and DC, or AD and after death, BC. That's
Yeah,
what it was. Yeah.
BC,
I'm
yeah.
thinking, I got a rock and roll background. I got AC/DC on my mind. So, but anyway, and it's that whole thing. It's like, well, when they come in and look, it's like, well, have you talked to your local people? Have you involved them in your process? And if you've got a good faith effort of doing that, they're like, okay, well, you may not meet the total 100% letter of the code, but because you've involved the local community and you're serving them the best that you can, they're not going to, the hammer won't come down on you quite as because you've made that good faith effort. And I think that's what they look for. But,
And for us, it's a little bit different than in California because you all have the opportunity to, you can, it's easier for you all to use legal action as a means of advocacy than it is for us here in South Carolina. They've kind of taken away a lot of our means for, having a stick, right? Sometimes I say, we prefer to use a carrot than the stick. The stick doesn't get us far here. If we try to use a stick, it just gets us nowhere. It gets us shut out of meetings. It gets us to where people just totally ignore us, and then we get nothing done. And so for us, using the carrot is our best option. And not only that is, I don't want to always have to use a stick. I don't want to always have to explain to people why things need to be accessible. If you start working with folks and you start showing them these things and getting them engaged, then I found that they go and start doing that themselves, and they do these things without having to be asked, and their minds are already at the forefront of these things. So it just it's making it easier
yeah.
in the long run.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I got to correct you. I'm a Nashville native now, so I'm in
Okay,
the South with
sorry.
you. So
Okay.
so when you say y'all, no, I used to be. No, but we have listeners all over the South, Northeast, and Northwest, and so your point is well taken. And yeah, I think it can be a double-edged sword. That's why I really like what you're doing in the Greenville area in South Carolina, because that's a state that doesn't have the compensatory damages litigation like California, Florida, and New York. Now, like you said, there's certainly a time and place for that, but I just love seeing the progress that you've made, like City of Greer and Greenville, and it's just a different approach. And I think people can look at your community down there and your group and connect with you and pick your brain. I mean, if you're listening and you like what you're hearing, I mean, I'll have Chris's contact information in the show notes here. You can go click on his LinkedIn profile and contact him. I'm sure he'd be happy to share some of his experience, because if you could implement something similar, even in California, and there's those communities within California that are very active with the local disabled community, and they have a lot of success without the litigation, because like you said, litigation doesn't really. I mean, look look what's going on at the federal level. I mean, everybody's suing everybody on both sides, and it's just like, it just becomes a logjam, and nobody gets anything done at that point. So it can be bad. So collaborative effort is always great. So that's awesome, Chris. I love that you shared with that. Moving on a little bit. What has been one of your biggest challenges when it comes to the ADA? Whether it's from your personal experience, having to use some of the built-in environment, or on your advocacy side, but just in general, what's one of your biggest challenges when it comes to the ADA?
I mean, I think the challenge, especially kind of like what we just said, is it's hard for us to, it doesn't have a whole lot of teeth for us here, the ADA. And, also it being a federal regulation, we still have people down here that just for the fact that it came down from the feds is a reason why they don't want anything to do with it
Yeah.
and want to, just fight it. Um, and so I think that is kind of made it a little bit hard to actually get things done in a more effective and expedited manner.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that just kind of has led us to where we are now, and trying to, I guess, work with people more. So I mean, it's tough, and kind of it's hard since we can't use the ADA to say like force people into like, hey, you actually need to go out and do these things, right? It can still have businesses around here that just like, we don't care. Well, I mean, we still have brand new builds around here, new builds that are inaccessible.
Yeah, that's so frustrating.
They just aren't in the code, and so it's frustrating in those ways, and so it's a longer route to try to uh, you use the carrot in this way. But I think that's what we're left with, honestly.
Yeah.
So we just have to fight the fight in any way we can.
Yeah, well, to build on that real quick, just to help out, if there's other advocacy listeners, I know a lot of people, a lot of variety listen to the show. If in a similar position and they're reaching out to the local code official or ADA coordinator or the local government to try to foster a relationship, what has your approach been? How have you what are some success things you've done to make that successful? I mean, do you take them to lunch? Do you send them a nasty email? I mean, did you build a relationship first? I mean, how were you able to be successful in kind of bridging that gap and getting it to kind of push it in the right way with that relationship with your local government officials?
Sure. So what we did, and again, this is a long plan here, but in 2013, actually the Barbara Stone Foundation hosted a meeting for all the local nonprofits, disability-based nonprofits in our area, uh, with the idea of, hey, we're doing a lot of good things, but there's still a lot of things that aren't getting done, accessibility-wise, inclusiveness, programmatically, systemically. There's still lots of things that aren't getting done. And so the idea came out of it is to create Greenville CAN, which stands for Collaborative Action Network, which is a social impact model. And so we gathered all these organizations and we made decisions about, okay, well, what things do we want to focus on and how can we all work together to overcome and remove some of these systemic barriers that still exist in our community. And by organizing ourselves, it made it easier when we came and approached any kind of government official or any municipality, as we have a lot of us who are involved. And then not only that, it wasn't just um, you know disability nonprofits, but other nonprofits who are kind of um, tangentially it's hard to say. We have one here in the area called 10 at the Top, which is for like the 10 top counties in South Carolina. And um, it kind of organizes economically, and they already had a bunch of ties. So as we kind of gathered, we connected with them. They helped connect us with other people. And so that's, honestly, is just having a large group of people pulling on all of our connections
Yeah.
in kind of a single route. And so that's what helped kind of get us in and helped us, bring in or develop relationships with the ADA coordinators, with, the local governments. And obviously, we do go out and have lunch together. We work together whenever he has any questions or they have any questions. Excuse me. Whenever any of the ADA coordinators have questions, they'll reach out to me, and just being there to um, kind of help them out whenever they need help,
Hmm.
they're more inclined to want to help us out. It's a very kind of, you know,
Collaborative.
yeah, collaborative relationship.
Yeah.
And um, through that, we were able to work. And one of the things I'm going to go ahead and I don't know if you intended on talking about this, but um, we kind of also came to the part of, there's a lot of parts of Greenville, downtown Greenville, that are inaccessible, slopes, stairs, things that we're never going to be able to change, no matter how much we advocate for these things. And so that's where we decided to create an app called Access GVL, which looks at the accessibility of restaurants, mainly in downtown Greenville along the central business district. And we wanted to use that as a way to uh, help encourage businesses to become more accessible, but also for just the city and the county and the people here to see that accessibility is something that's important and to see us doing something unique and cool with it and trying to just kind of get a bigger buy-in and to make people ask questions and want to say, well, is this accessible or can we be part of the app or just as a way to try to raise awareness
Yeah.
because we still deal with kind of older mindsets here, and so
Yeah.
by doing that, we want to just kind of generate a conversation, start a conversation between people,
Yeah. I'm
and it's
glad.
been. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I'm glad you brought up Access GVL because I wanted to talk to you about that. And I know there's a similar app up in the Seattle area, Bellevue. I think I don't know if Microsoft helped it, but it's called Blue Path, and I'm sure there's other ones around the country. But yeah, the Access GVL app is really really neat. And I know you're not it's not you're not there's other people that develop that and are involved in that. But your experience is that help you as a user going to restaurants downtown to be able to find accessible park? I mean, tell us a little bit about what it does for you as a person that needs to know, where accessible parking is and where more easy features are in an older downtown like that. I mean, how do you use the app, I guess is the question on a personal level.
Yeah, so we have a few different features. It kind of depends on what you need. We want to make it an app that was so basically the Barbara Stone Foundation and the city of Greenville collaborated kind of through Greenville Can to make this app together. Um, and so we since we had already had that relationship with the city that we had been developing over these years, it was an easy end for us to start to, we kind of had somebody in the city government who was able to talk to the folks there, like the web developers at the city, to say, hey, can we support this app? The Sorry, I'm not answering the question that you initially asked, but
That's okay.
um, as a user, um, we have like a map feature on it, so you can kind of just pull up the map. I'm downtown. I want to see what restaurants are around me that would be accessible. And like I said, was not just focused on physical accessibility. We have information about lighting, how bright it is,
Mm,
how are there window shades, how loud is the restaurant typically. Some of these things are obviously very subjective, and so we kind of have to give basic findings because things can be different at different times too, right? A restaurant could be very quiet at one point of the night and be very loud at another
right.
point. So it's hard to say. It's
Tuesday night versus Friday night.
right. And so we kind of try to let them know too in the app that like, hey, when we're saying these things, imagine they're for the busiest
Yeah.
times, right? So if I say it's really loud in there, that's during their busiest time.
Yeah.
When there's nobody in there, yeah, guess what? All the restaurants are gonna be
Right.
quiet, no
Yeah.
matter what kind of restaurant you have. But so there's just all types of information. There's information about, what the readability of the menus is like, different aspects of the restrooms. We use the ADA standards, the 2010 standards, as the basis for this. And so we kind of had to break everything down because we didn't want to list all the information out just because there's so much. So we did generalize some of the information. um, so we kind of, are things fully accessible, mostly accessible, partially accessible, or not accessible at all? Um, and so we look at, the entryway, the dining area. We list off how many accessible tables there are versus inaccessible tables.
Hmm.
We talk about, there's any ramps, the restrooms. But then we also have, well, how do you get to those restaurants? Because most of our restaurants along the main street of downtown Greenville don't have parking lot or don't have their own parking lot. So they have to go from parking garages. So we listed where all the parking garages are and where all the accessible parking spaces are within downtown Greenville. So we have those coded by, you garage or lot or
Mm.
by street, like on street parking. And then we have what we've kind of deemed the most accessible routes from those parking spaces to the restaurant themselves. And then if there's any barriers along those routes, is it steep on a certain way you should avoid, or are there stairs you should avoid, or is there an elevator here that you need, or where's all the public restrooms? So we just wanted to, there's a ton of detail in the app.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about it is we wanted to provide a bunch of detail, but that also limits our scope. We can only go so far out.
Yeah.
We can only do this for so many restaurants or so many businesses in our area before it starts to overwhelm us. And that's kind of the problem with just the trying to do an app like this in general. It's you're either providing a ton of information, but can't give that information for a lot of different places, or you're doing a lot of different places, but you're not providing a bunch of information because there's a lot of different apps that are similar to this, both national, international, or locally like ours. Um, but a lot of them are also uh, they get user generated content, which for us is, I found in my my 10, 12 years of being in a wheelchair that everyone has different opinions about what accessibility means and what accessibility is.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, somebody says, yes, this bathroom's accessible. Like, what does that mean?
Right.
Does it
Well, if you're
walls or
visually impaired versus mobility impaired, I mean,
yeah, exactly. And
to-
so that's where we want to kind of provide that information, but also it does limit us and how far we can go.
yeah, no, that's super, super exciting. And I'm glad to hear you were able to accomplish that. And one of the interesting things about the Access GVL app that intrigued me is, especially coming from California, because I think, the immediate, at least in California or a state that's more litigious, I should say, than South Carolina, some pushback they might get. Well, if I put my information in there as a restaurant owner, am I opening myself up, especially if I'm in the not accessible category, that lower category? So did you have any, were there any businesses that were concerned with that, or how did you overcome some of those objections, if you had any at all? I don't know.
Yeah, so I was definitely concerned when we started this process of reaching out to restaurants, how much pushback we would get. Um, and surprisingly enough, a lot of the restaurants were very welcoming to us, uh, just under the fact that they wanted to know this information. It wasn't like they were scared of it. It was like, yes, tell us what we need, how we can make these changes, how we can make these improvements.
Yeah.
Did that mean everybody did every single thing that we said? No, but we were also careful that, we kind of understood that we didn't want to list out every specific thing that was going on there. So, for a bathroom, we can say it's mostly accessible. For us, we didn't really feel like that was jeopardizing that restaurant or
Sure.
putting them in a specific place. We may have things that, you know, um, um, you know, if, for instance, there's one restaurant there, you have to go downstairs to get in it. But there is a way to get around. There is an access point through like a back alley, but you got to go down a little hill and you got to do some things. So we do talk about some of those things, but again, I don't necessarily think that would put those restaurants in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And then I think some of the restaurants who were really concerned about it were we did get some that said, we need to talk to corporate about this. And then we never really heard back. Yeah, our app doesn't feature every single restaurant in Greenville. It's just the ones who volunteered for it.
Mhm.
And obviously a lot of those were accessible to begin with. Um, but I think for the ones that weren't, they wanted to know how they could become accessible so that if DOJ did come knocking, they had the answers and they said, well, this is the things that we've already been doing to make it accessible. And, if we haven't gotten to things yet, at least here's our plan to get there.
Sure. Yeah. And I think if you're not listing out every single barrier, like, yeah, this restaurant at 421 Main Street has a mirror that's off a half inch. I mean, in California, the the attorney would just send a letter and not even go there. It's just because it's so rampant. And so I could see where businesses in a state like that might have concern. So I think that collaborative approach, and then also just being more general about overall accessibility as opposed to every specific barrier was smart. And because it achieves the goal of helping people with disabilities make decisions. And that's the big sell I try to make all the business owners is that, I think the study was in 2018 that said that the discretionary income people with disabilities have is like twice the amount of the teenage market. And having raised 3 teenagers, that's a lot of money. And so we want people with disabilities in our businesses buying our coffee, buying our, dry cleaning and all those services, because it's a huge segment of income. And if your business is easy to get into and do business with, I would imagine, Chris, you're going to pull in and go in there and do your business just like everybody else. But if you got to go down steps and try to find a parking stall and drive 4 blocks to get in there, you're probably going to go somewhere else where it's a little easier.
Yeah, I mean that's totally correct. And I think some businesses recognize that, some are still trying to learn that, but I think that's also another part of this app is showing restaurants and places that, hey, there is that discretionary market or funds or the
Yeah.
money that people with disabilities have a lot of money. And guess what? We have family members and family of
Yeah.
people with disabilities. And even if that person with a disability may not be there at that moment when they're going to the restaurant, they've through that study, they also found that those family members and people will tend to want to frequent places that are already accessible just because they know
Yeah.
they've made the effort to become
Yeah.
accessible, excuse me.
Yeah. It just makes it easier. They don't have to think about it. And, it's always, there's challenges with thinking ahead and, and, is there an accessible table? Can I get through the dining area just to get to the accessible table
Yeah.
and without being, without it being awkward, and having been temporarily, not to any close magnitude of you or anybody else, but I, had a experience in my late 30s and the broken leg, and it really opened my eyes. Had been requiring all these requirements, but it didn't really click till I needed, that's what a curb ramp's for. I can't even step up a 6-inch curb right now because of my broken leg on crutches. And that curb ramp saved my life. It's like, and then the grab bars in the bathroom trying to, just use the toilet with a temporary disability, let alone a lifelong one. It was just so eye opening and so forth. So that's great. We'll put the link to Access GVL for those of you listening to check out. It might be something to implement in your community. Really helps out the disabled community and helps businesses. And it's just a great thing. And last question here, Chris, before we close out.
Sure.
And I'll post all those links in the show notes. I got to ask you a semi-technical question since we're code nerds here on the ADA Shop Talk, right?
Okay.
Speaking for myself. People call them the yellow bumps or truncated domes, detectable warnings. Now, those are typically for the visually impaired. But you
Yes,
as a person who uses a mobility device or chair, how do you view those yellow dots?
I I view them in the sense of I I know how important they are to people with visual disabilities. And so if my chair gets rattled a little going over a 2 foot long space, I mean, I don't really care that much. If it really helps other people, then I'll take that hit. I'm not really concerned about that.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me that much. I mean, it's a small little area. I know some people don't like it because it does. And if you're at a point where, it does feel like it totally rattles you, I understand that because I was at a point with my MS where I'd go over things, any kind of shock or vibration would throw me, and I'm like, oh, I hate that. So I get that part. But just me personally, I I kind of view disabilities as we are one huge group together. We are the largest minority in the world. And the reason that the ADA got passed is because we all stuck together and we all worked as one to fight to get it. And that's where we need to be now is because I feel like a lot of us after the ADA was passed kind of split back up into our different areas of doing things, and we just kind of lost the momentum that we had. And so if we can gather as one whole forward movement again, I think that will can take us kind of to that next step of accessibility and universal design to where we really want to be.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I kind of teed you up for a confrontation there. It wasn't intentional, but I know there's a lot of different perspectives on those things, from moms with cans of soda falling off the cart out of Walmart when they hit those things. But they do help people, and having an understanding of them. And I appreciate your perspective, and it's a very collaborative one, which is what your vibe is all about, and why I wanted to have you on this show, because you get it, and getting people that get it, not only the technical side, and understand the need for all those things, because it's been underserved, and we still have brand new buildings being built without accessibility, but also the collaborative approach, when to pull out the big hammer, when not to. And so your perspective is much appreciated.
Thank you very much for having me on today. I really appreciate it. And if anybody would like to get in touch with me, I would love to talk with you more. So I think Paul's going to put out my information. So just reach out to me.
Yeah. Do you mind if I include your email in the show notes?
Absolutely.
All right. I'll include all of Chris's information in the show notes, his LinkedIn link, the Access GVL, and the Barbara Stone Foundation. And Chris, thanks again for coming on the show today, and appreciate all your efforts and coming on today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.